All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Friday. Yeah, it's Friday, November 3rd, 2017. And this is Before the First Cup with Jules here on UCY.TV. Happy Friday, everyone. It is a damp and soggy 50 degrees and overcast here in upstate New York. So where did we leave off yesterday? We listened to an interview from the Abundance 360 conference hosted by Peter Diamandis, talking to Ray Kurzweil about the future of the next 25 years and what we have to look forward to. One of the interesting things that Kurzweil came out and talked about, like he always does, is how we are going to connect our neocortex to the cloud in the future. And these technologies that are coming are all about sucking you into the machine. And if there is a theme, that is one thing that we look at quite often here on the show. Well, I want to continue down that path today and kind of look at what technology is doing to children and to children's brains to prepare them for the coming singularity. There was a story out of MIT Technology Review that came out 2 days ago, November 1st, 2017. And Kurzweil and Peter had talked about Human 2.0. We've talked about those before as well, and how we're going to be upgraded in the future. Here's a story under the topic of rewriting life, Eugenics 2.0. We are at the dawn of choosing embryos by health, height, and more. Will you be among the first to pick your kid's IQ? And as machine learning unlocks predictions from DNA databases, scientists say parents could have choices never before possible. Nathan Treff was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 24, and it's a disease that runs in families, but it has complex causes. More than one gene is involved, and the environment plays a role as well. So you don't know who will get it. Treff's grandfather had it and lost a leg, but Treff's 3 young kids are fine so far, and he's crossing his fingers they won't develop it later. Now Treff is an in vitro fertilization specialist. He's working on a radical way to change the odds. Using a combination of computer models and DNA testing, his startup company is working with genomic prediction, and he thinks it has a way of predicting which in vitro fertilization embryos in a laboratory dish would be most likely to develop type 1 diabetes or other complex diseases. Armed with such statistical scorecards, doctors and parents could huddle and avoid choosing embryos with failing grades. And IVF clinics already test the DNA of embryos to test for rare diseases like cystic fibrosis. And there are other pre-implantation tests that are poised for dramatic leaps forward as it becomes possible to peer more deeply at an embryo's genome and create broad statistical forecasting about the person it will become. The advance is occurring, say scientists, thanks to a growing flood of genetic data collected from large population studies. Don't feed the machine. And as a statistical model known as predictors gobble up DNA and health information about hundreds of thousands of people, they're getting way more accurate at spotting genetic patterns that foreshadow disease risk. Check that box. When you go to 23andMe, you'll become a part of that National Institute of Health study. But they have a controversial side, since the same technique can be used to project the eventual height, weight, skin tone, and even the intelligence of an in vitro embryo. In addition to Treff, whose company's scientific officer, the founders of Genomic Predictions are Stephen Thew, a physicist who is a vice president for research at Michigan State University, and Laurent Tellier, a Danish bioinformatician who is CEO. Both Thew and Tellier have been closely involved with projects in China, no surprise there, that aims to sequence the genomes of mathematical geniuses, hoping to shed light on the genetic basis of IQ. Look out, people, because if you're not in the top 5th percentile, you're not going to even be born in the future. The company plans to rely on a tidal wave of new knowledge showing how small genetic differences can add up to one person, but not another, at high odds for diabetes, a neurotic personality, taller or shorter height. Already, such polygenic risk scores are in use in direct-to-consumer gene testing, such as reports from 23andMe, that tell customers their genetic chance of being overweight. And for adults, risk scores are little more than a novelty or a source of health advice they can ignore. But if that same information is generated about an embryo, it could lead to an existential consequence: who will be born and who will always stay in a laboratory freezer. I remind my partners, if my parents had this test, I wouldn't be here, says Treff, a prize-winning expert on diagnostic technology who's the author of more than 90 scientific papers. Genomic Prediction was founded this year, and it has raised funds from venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, though it declines to say who they are. Yes, Eugenics 101. I bet Billy Gates is involved. Tellier, whose inspiration is the science fiction film Gattaca, says the company plans to offer reports to IVF doctors and parents identifying outliers, and that would be those embryos whose genetic scores put them at the wrong end of the statistical curve for disorders such as diabetes, late-life osteoporosis, schizophrenia, and dwarfism, depending on whether models for those problems prove accurate. The company's concept, which calls expanded pre-implantation genetic testing, or EPGT for short, would effectively add a range of common disease risks to the menu of rare ones already available, which it also plans to test for. Its promotional material uses a picture of mostly submerged icebergs to get the idea across, and we believe it will become a standard part of IVF processes, says Tellier, and it isn't just a test for Down syndrome, it is a standard part of pregnancy. Some experts contacted by MIT Technology Review said that they believed it is premature to introduce polygenic scoring technology into IVF clinics, though perhaps not by very much. Matthew Rabinowitz, CEO of prenatal testing company Natera, based in California, says he thinks prediction obtained today could be largely misleading because DNA models don't function well enough. But Rabinowitz agrees that the technology is coming. How horrifying is this? Let's decide now not only how to change hair color and things of that nature, but let's determine who gets born and who doesn't, and who gets used for embryonic stem cell testing to try to splice and dice and cure disease, and who actually gets born into a human being in later life. Don't think that this isn't going to become mainstream. Testing embryos for disease risk, including risk for diseases that develop only late in life, is considered ethically acceptable by U.S. fertility doctors. But the new DNA scoring models mean parents might be able to choose their kids on the basis traits of IQ or weight. And that is because, just like type 1 diabetes, these traits are the result of complex genetic influences that the predictor algorithms are designed to find. So let's turn the AI on, deciding who is going to live and who is going to be born. It is the camel's nose under the tent, because if you're doing it for something more serious, then it's trivially easy to look for something else, says Michelle Meyer, a bioethicist at the Geisner Health Institute, who analyzes issues in reproductive genetics. And there is a genomic dossier on each embryo, and if you flip through the book, imagine picking an embryo that is most likely to get into Harvard, or be like mom, or tall like dad. And for genomic prediction, a tiny startup based out of a tech incubator in New Jersey, such questions will be especially sharply drawn, and that is because of Hugh's longstanding interest in genetic selection for superior intelligence. Oh, listen to that. In 2014, Hugh authored an essay titled, quote, "Superintelligent Humans Are Coming," in which he argued that selecting embryos for intelligence could boost the resulting child's IQ by 15 IQ points. Genomic Prediction says that it will only report diseases that is identify these embryos it thinks will develop into people with serious medical problems. And even so, on his blog and in public statements, Hugh has for some years been developing a vision that goes far beyond that. Suppose I could tell you embryo 4 is going to be the tallest, embryo 3 is going to be the smartest, embryo 2 is going to be very antisocial, and suppose that level of granularity was available in the reports, he told the conservative radio and YouTube personality Stephen Molyneux this spring. And this near-term future that we face as a civilization, and this is going to be here, he says, the fuel for predictive modeling is a deluge of new data, most recently genetic readouts and medical records for 500,000 middle-aged Britons were released in July by the UK Biobank, a national precision medicine project in that country. The data trove included for each volunteer a map of about 800,000 single nucleotide polymorphisms, points where their DNA differs slightly from another person's. This release caused a pell-mell rush by geneticists to update the calculations by exactly how much of human disease or even routine behaviors like bread consumption these genetic differences could explain. And armed with the UK data, Sue and Tellier claimed a breakthrough. For one easily measured trait, height, they use machine learning techniques to create a predictor that behaves flawlessly. They reported that the model could, for the most part, predict people's heights from their DNA data to within 3 or 4 centimeters. Height is currently the easiest trait to predict. It is determined mostly by genes and is always recorded in a population database. But Tellier says that genetic databases are rapidly approaching the size needed to make accurate predictions about other human features, including risk for disease whose true causes aren't even known. Don't feed the machine. Tellier says a genomic prediction will zero in on disease traits for which the predictors are already performing fairly well or will soon, and these will include autoimmune diseases like Tuff suffers from, and in those conditions, a smaller set of genes dominates the predictions, sometimes making them more reliable. In a report from Germany in 2014, for instance, we found that it was possible to distinguish fairly accurately from a polygenic DNA score between a person with type 1 diabetes and a person without it. And while the scores aren't perfectly accurate, consider how they might influence a prospective parent. On average, children of a man with type 1 diabetes have a 1 in 17 chance of developing the ailment, being the best of several embryos made in an IVF clinic. Even with an error-prone predictor, could lower those odds. In the case of height, genomic prediction hopes to use the model to help identify embryos that would grow into adults shorter than 4'10", the medical definition of dwarfism, Tellier says, and there are more physical and psychological disadvantages with being so short. My grandmother was 4'11". She was a pretty nasty, outgoing little woman. And eventually the company could also have the ability to identify intellectual problems such as embryos with a predicted IQ of less than 70. And the company doesn't intend to give out raw trait scores to parents, only to flag embryos likely to be abnormal. And that is by their definition of abnormal. And this is because the product has to be ethically defensible, says Sue HSU. We would only reveal the negative outlier state. We do not report that this guy is going to be in the NBA. Some scientists doubt the scores will prove useful at picking better people from IVF dishes. And even if they are accurate on the average, for individuals, there is no guarantee of pinpoint precision. And what is more, the environment has a big impact on the traits as genes do. There's a high probability that you will get it wrong, and that would be my concern, says Manuel Rivas, a professor at Stanford University who studied the genetics in Crohn's disease. If someone is using that information to make decisions about an embryo, I don't know what to make of it. Efforts to introduce this type of statistical scoring with machine learning into reproduction have in the past drawn criticism. And in 23andMe, in 2013, 23andMe provoked outrage when it won a patent on the idea of drop-down menus that parents could use to pick sperm and egg donors, let's say to get a specific eye color. The company, which is funded by Google, quickly backpedaled. But since then, polygenic scores have become a routine part of novelty DNA tests. It's a company called Human Code sells a $199 test online that uses these scores to tell two people about how tall their kids might be. And in the dairy cattle industry, polygenetic tests are widely used to rate young animals for how much milk that they will produce. And at a broad level, our understanding of complex traits has evolved, and it is not that there are a few genes contributing to complex traits. It is tens or thousands, or even all genes that contribute, says Myers. that has led to a polygenic risk score and its many variants, each with a small contribution of their own, but each have a significant contribution together. Then you add them up, and in his predictor for height, Sue says eventually he's made use of 20,000 different variants to guess how tall each person was. So until now, doctors have used a PGD test to detect embryos with major abnormalities, such as missing chromosomes, as well as those with single gene defects, and parents who carry those defective genes that cause Huntington's disease, for example, can use embryo testing to avoid having a child with a fatal brain ailment. The obstacle to polygenic testing has been with so few cells, it is difficult to get the broad, accurate view of an embryo's genomic necessity to perform the needed calculations. It is very hard to make reliable measurements on that little DNA. Tallier says that Genomic Predictions has developed an improved method for analyzing embryonic DNA, which he says will be the first used to improve on traditional testing combined with many other gene tests all in one. Taylor says that the same technique is what will permit it to collect polygenic scores on embryos. And this is getting really technical and boring. So let's see. Robots, we covered this story last week or the week before. Robots will have an IQ of 10,000 and be 100 times more intelligent than the average human in just 30 years, says billionaire CEO of SoftBank. We found out from Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, as well as Raymond Kurzweil, that in the future we are going to have to supplement ourselves to be able to compete with the machine. We're going to be able to connect our Cortex to the cloud to be able to groupthink and become super intelligent. Just recently, and this was yesterday, Stephen Hawking popped back up again, and he fears now that AI may replace humans, and he is not alone. Stephen Hawking is worried that artificial intelligence could copy itself, and Google's already is, and replace humans as Earth's dominant life form. It sounds far-fetched, but the 75-year-old physicist is not alone in his predictions, as tech entrepreneurs have also sounded the alarm. I fear, he says, that AI may replace humans altogether, says Hawking in an interview with Wired this week. If people design computer viruses, someone will design AI that improves and replicates itself, and this will be a new life form that outperforms humans. Hawking isn't the first big name to warn about AI. SpaceX and Tesla founder Elon Musk has claimed that technology poses, quote, a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization and its exponential growth, like we found out listening to Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil yesterday, is advancing like a tidal wave. Among other projects, Musk has criticized plans to develop godlike AI, we talked about that one last week, capable of forming its own religion. Musk and Hawking have worked together before to warn about the future of AI and autonomous weaponry. The pair joined hundreds of other researchers and experts earlier this year to endorse a list of 23 guiding principles for the future development of AI. The Asilomar AI principles include things like basic ideas ensuring that humans have control, but also cover bigger concepts like ensuring such systems have a shared benefit, and we've designed machines with compatible human values, like not going through a petri dish and determining which embryos are worth being born and which aren't. Musk is a deeper thinker about problems, and I think it is right to be concerned about AI, says Google CEO Sundar Pichai in an interview when told that Musk had raised concerns about his company's AI-powered cameras. Like Musk, Hawking is worried people aren't concerned enough about the pace of change. And at the launch of a Cambridge University Artificial Intelligence Center last year, he said that while experiments with machines learning how to play Go were cool, they will surely pale against what is coming in the future decades. And I believe there is no deep difference between what can be achieved by a biological brain and what can be achieved by a computer, says Hawking. It therefore follows that a computer can, in theory, emulate human intelligence as well as exceed it. So if we listen to the billionaire from SoftBank, we are going to have machines with an IQ of 10,000, and they most certainly will eclipse us as humans. Now, we have the technology industry that is moving forward into things such as healthcare, and they are mapping the human brain as a tool to be able to create better artificial intelligence. We read about the brain database that just went online last week or the week before from the Paul Allen Institute of Brain Science, where they have a 3D representation of neurons. And a lot of that was garnered from some of the work that George Church is doing, barcoding neurons, we had originally read. And this is now being given to neuroscientists to figure out how they can garner better information from brain scans to be able to give some sort of solid diagnoses of brain illness. Well, a story came out the other day, and this was out of MIT Technology Review. AI has learned to spot suicidal tendencies from brain scans. Oh, yes, it has. So this would be some sort of mental illness. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people between the ages of 15 and 34 in the United States, and clinicians have limited tools to identify those at risk. A new machine learning technique documented in a paper published today in the Nature of Human Behavior could help identify those suffering from suicidal thoughts. Researchers looked at 34 young adults, evenly split between suicidal participants and a control group. And each subject went through an fMRI, and they were presented with 3 lists of 10 words, and all of the words were related to suicide, like words like death, distress, or fatal, as well as positive effects like carefree, kindness, and innocence, as well as negative effects like boredom, evil, and guilty. And the researchers also used previously mapped neural signatures, that show that brain patterns of emotions like shame and anger. Researchers then divided the suicidal patients into 2 groups, those who had attempted it and those who had not, and trained a new classifier that was able to correctly identify 16 of the 17 patients from their brain scans. Now, guys, this is what is really scary about this. As these technologies are rolling out, and every time you have anything that's going on, they want to do another brain scan. Take it from someone who's had 5 so far in 2017, and I'm beginning to wonder where all that data is going. But one of the things that I want to point out is that as they are feeding this data into the machine, and then they are turning the AI onto that data, and whoever is messaging me, I am on the air. The results showed that healthy patients and those with suicidal thoughts showed markedly different reactions to words. For example, when suicidal participants were shown the word death, the shame area of their brain lit up more than it did in the control group. Likewise, trouble also evoked more activity in the sadness area. And this is the latest effort aimed at bringing AI into psychiatry. And this is probably one of my most scariest nightmares, is having AI decide who is mentally ill. Researchers are also working on machine learning projects that span from analyzing MRIs to predict major depressive disorders to pick out PTSD people from speech patterns. As we have all of these new speech-enabled technologies in our homes, and they are scanning with language processing, all developed by Kurzweil, our cell phones and our Skype conversations. Earlier this year, Wired wrote about researchers who built a system that can sift through health records to flag someone at risk of committing suicide between 80 and 90% accuracy. Facebook is also using text mining to identify users at risk of suicide or self-harm and then pointing them to mental health resources, or having someone with the white coats come kick your door in. Artificial intelligence has already made waves in the medical field at large, and there are also algorithms that are so good at detecting tumors and other problems in CT scans that Jeffrey Hinton, one of the most foremost researchers in deep learning, told the New Yorker that radiologists will eventually be out of a job. We've said that as well. Robots are coming. And indeed, he said they should stop training radiologists now. In this case, the research is more likely to inspire new human-driven therapies that put a whole new field of worth on a doctor's out of a job. The paper pointed out that identifying different patterns and areas could suggest new regions to target for brain stimulation techniques, and identifying particular emotional responses two suicide-related terms could also be useful to psychotherapists in treating their patients. Now, what struck me is we've been following a lot of this digging into the brain and understanding how the brain works and even barcoding it down to a neurological level. There was a story that came out on Halloween, on Tuesday, October 31st, 2017, out of Wired.com that really struck me as interesting. And this is where things are headed. After the Las Vegas shooting, that one that they still haven't come up with a reason that it happened, they are now searching for meaning in a killer's brain. Oh, yes, you heard it. On October 1st, 2017, Stephen Paddock killed 58 people and wounded 546 more, firing multiple rifles out of a hotel room in Vegas overlooking a concert. He then killed himself, and no one knows why he did it. As a part of the attempt to figure that out, New York Times and others reports that the Clark County Coroner's Office is sending Paddock's brain to Stanford University to the lab of Hans Vogel, who is a neuropathologist. Vogel, who at the request of Stanford's communication office is not speaking to the press, will perform both a visual and a microscopic examination of Paddock's brain, looking for abnormalities, tumors, degenerative illnesses, or anything else that might suggest why an otherwise unassuming video poker player would turn his extensive gun collection on innocent people. And nobody thinks that this is going to work. Well, still, I'm telling you, the fact that they're going to send someone who went off the rails and send their brain to a lab now to be dissected like a rat to be looked at to determine what is wrong with him is pretty disturbing as well. And don't think this isn't going to be you or me or the embryos growing in an in vitro fertilization dish in the future. So, sure, this is due diligence, part of a complete investigation. Vogel is a pathologist, so he may find something pathological. Maybe there was a tumor in the ventral media or a dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, parts of the brain that have to do with impulse control and willpower. And this is something that is going to tie into what I wanted to talk about with children's brains on a computer and the frontal cortex with impulse control and dopamine, and that is pushing that addiction button. Damage there, or maybe damage to the inferior posterior ventral cortex, can also make people more violent. Under a microscope stained with various dyes, the brain can reveal degenerative disorders that can contribute to depression or poor emotional control. People get tumors and degenerative diseases all the time, but most of them don't become vicious killers. If you have a mass murderer and you look at his brain, it would completely amaze me if you could see anything relevant or useful, says Christoph Cook, chief scientist and president of the Allen Institute for Brain Science. Ding! That brain will probably look relatively normal. That, in short, is a mind-body problem that scientists and philosophers have struggled with for a long time. You have the meat, which is billions of neurons and other gunk performing electrochemically networked computations. And then you have the ghost, and that is the perception of sensory inputs, the reconstruction inside the brain, the processing of those reconstructions, and then maybe even an awareness of some of that processing. In other words, you have consciousness. Neuroscientists actually know quite a lot about the human brain and the mind it generates. And at the Allen Institute, they're building maps of all those neural connections. They can build interfaces to it, wires that go through the skull and into the cortex so that people can control wheelchairs or play a piano by using their brain and by applying machine learning algorithms to brain activity. As volunteers watch images for hours inside of an fMRI, computers can learn to infer from changes in that activity what the person is seeing to, in essence, read people's minds. And it works on more than visual input. It could be the same algorithms to work on figuring out how someone feels. Oh, isn't that flower pretty? Isn't that car cool? Which dress looks better? I see no a priori reason that could not be done today, says Cook. And maybe somebody is already doing it. So now let's take a look. We had this guy in Vegas, what was his name? I don't even remember his name. Paddock. We already know made gambling as his living. And let's listen to this. Flashing lights and music turn rats into problem gamblers. And we covered the story back last year. This is January 20th, 2016, out of ScienceDaily.com. Add flashing lights and music to gambling, and it encourages risky decision-making, even if you are a rat. Scientists have discovered rats behave like problem gamblers when sound and light cues were added to a rat casino model. And what is more, the researchers were able to correct the behavior by blocking the action of a specific dopamine receptor, laying the groundwork for possible treatment of gambling addictions in humans. Remember, it all takes place in that same part of the brain, and that is the frontal cortex, and that is the dopamine button, and is tied to the same area of the brain where we have cocaine addiction, sex addiction, eating addictions, and behavioral problems. And the more dopamine you have and the more dopamine regulation issues you have, the more likely you are to become a psychopath. And we have already established that in research we have done on the show. In research published in the Journal of Neuroscience, scientists have discovered that rats behaved like problem gamblers when sound and light cues were added to a rat casino. What is more, the researchers were able to correct the behavior by blocking the action of a specific dopamine receptor, laying the groundwork for a possible treatment of gambling addiction in humans. When the scientists gave the rats a drug that blocked the action of a specific dopamine receptor that has been linked to addiction, the rats no longer behaved like problem gamblers, but the dopamine blockers had minimal effect on rats who gambled without flashing lights and sound cues. So flashing lights also help focus that dopamine receptor. Now, if you remember, there was another story that we had read probably about a year ago, August 27th, 2016. This came out of the New York Post, so take it for what it's worth, but I have found a lot of supporting material after this. This was titled, "It is Digital Heroin, How Screens Turn Kids into Psychotic Junkies." Now, I had mentioned on this show how, besides myself, I am that the middle school my daughter is going to has given all the children notebook computers. And there is really nothing in the way to speak of as textbooks now, which I'm very upset about. So they have them online from the time they get home until the time they go to bed. Now, I noticed a long time ago that anytime my daughter got near a device, whether it be a television or a computer screen, we always had issues with discipline afterward, with her either being disrespectful or not listening or unable to accomplish a series of tasks, and this has really exacerbated our problem. So now it has turned into a very serious issue. So I put together a bunch of these links again because I'm going to have to take them to the school and do a presentation, I think, because not only is this creating junkies out of our children, but it is doing permanent brain damage to the frontal lobe of the brain, with the executive functioning of their brains. It is digital heroin, how screens turn kids into psychotic junkies. Susan, and her name has been changed to protect the innocent, but her 6-year-old son John an iPad when he was in first grade. I thought, why not let him get a jump on things, she told me during a therapy session, and that is the author of the story. John's schooling had just begun using devices with younger and younger grades, and his technology teacher had raved about their educational benefits, which is bullshit. This is all to damage your children, so they're going to need some sort of robot helper in the future. I really believe that. So Susan wanted to do what was best for her little boy who loved reading and playing baseball. She started letting John play different educational games on his iPad and eventually discovered Minecraft, which the technology teacher assured her was like, quote, electronic Legos. And remembering how much fun she had had as a child building and playing with the interlocking plastic blocks, Susan let her son play Minecraft during his afternoons. At first, Susan was pleased, and John seemed engaged in creative play as he explored the cube world of the game, and she did notice that the game wasn't quite like Legos that she remembered. After all, she didn't have to kill animals or find rare minerals to survive to get to the next level of her beloved old game. But John did seem to really like playing, and the school even had a Minecraft club, so how bad could it be? Well, still, Susan couldn't deny she was seeing changes in John. He started getting more and more focused on his game and losing interest in baseball and reading while refusing to do his chores. Some mornings he would wake up and tell her that he could see the cube shapes in his dreams. And although that concerned her, she thought her son might be exhibiting an active imagination. And as his behavior continued to deteriorate, she tried to take the game away, but John threw temper tantrums. And his outbursts were so severe that she gave in, still rationalizing to herself and over again that it is educational. Then one night she realized that something was seriously wrong. She walked into his room to check on him, and he was supposed to be sleeping, and she was just so frightened. She found him sitting up in bed, staring wide-eyed and bloodshot eyes looking into the distance as his glowing iPad lay next to him. And I'm telling you guys, it is an addiction button. He seems to be in a trance, and she, beside herself with panic, Susan had to shake the boy repeatedly to snap him out of it. And distraught, she could not understand how her once happy and healthy little boy had become so addicted to the game that wound him up in a catatonic stupor. There is a reason that most tech-cautious parents and tech designers and engineers keep their children away from technology. Stephen Jobs was notoriously a low-tech parent, and Silicon Valley tech executives and engineers enroll their kids in the no-tech Waldorf schools. Google founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page went to no-tech Montessori schools, as did Amazon creator Jeff Bezos and Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales. I'm going to tell you, we never even had a computer in school. When I graduated my senior year, we didn't have one in school. Many parents intuitively understand that ubiquitous glowing screens have a negative effect on kids. We see the aggressive temper tantrums when the devices are taken away, and that is the addiction factor, and the wandering attention span when children are not perpetually stimulated by their hyper-arousing devices. Worse yet, we see children who become bored, apathetic, uninteresting, and uninterested when not plugged in. But it's even worse than we think. Now we know that those iPads, smartphones, and Xboxes are a form of digital drug. Recent brain imaging research shows that they affect the brain's frontal cortex, which controls your executive functioning, including your impulse control, in exactly the same way that cocaine does. Technology is so hyper-arousing that it raises dopamine levels, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter most involved in dynamics of addiction, as much as sex. And this addictive effect is why Dr. Peter Wybrow, director of neuroscience at UCLA, calls screens electronic cocaine, and Chinese researchers call them digital heroin. In fact, Dr. Andrew Doan, the head of addiction research for the Pentagon and the U.S. Navy, who's been researching video game addiction, calls video games and screen technologies digital pharmakeia, which is Greek for drugs. That is right, your kid's brain on Minecraft looks like a brain on drugs, and no wonder we have a hard time peeling kids away from their screens, and we find our little ones agitated when their screen time is interrupted. I'm going to tell you something else. Not only does it affect executive functioning and addict your children to the dangling dopamine carrot, but the thing that's so frightening about this is it breaks their ability to be able to order skills in order to get anything accomplished from point A to point B. It says that children in front of a computer screen are impulsive, moody, and can't pay attention, and much of the damage that occurs in the brain's frontal lobe, which is undergoing massive changes from puberty until their mid-20s. And that's the scariest part. I mean, middle school, age 11, prepubescent, there couldn't be a worse time to force kids to be on a computer from 3 p.m. until 11 p.m. at night every single day. Frontal lobe development, in turn, largely determines every success in every area of life, from a sense of well-being to academic or career success to relationship skills. And current clinical research correlates screen technology disorders like ADHD, addiction, anxiety, depression, increased aggression, and even psychosis. Most shocking of all, recent brain imaging studies conclusively now shows that excessive screen exposure can neurologically damage a young person's developing brain in the same way that drug addiction can. And this is what they're doing to our kids, guys. I mean, I just can't even believe this. So now we're going to have all of these mentally neurologically damaged children that are coming up through the pipeline. Who better yet to scan with an fMRI and use artificial intelligence and brain implants to cure them? I mean, this is horrifying. And this dangling dopamine carrot is sucking our children in. The education system is pushing our children in. And younger, they are getting these devices. We have also looked at optogenetics and some of the flashing lights, like they found with rats, turning into problem gamblers. They can also flip neurological switches and change behaviors with flashing frequencies of light per optogenetics and LED screens. Author and adolescent psychiatrist Dr. Victoria Duncey has developed the term electronic screen syndrome, more affectionately known as ESS, wherein she hypothesizes that interacting with screens overstimulates the child and shifts the nervous system into a flight or fight mode, which then leads to dysregulation and disorganization of various biological and hormonal systems. These disrupted systems can then create or exacerbate disorders such as ADHD, depression, oppositional defiant disorder, and anxiety. And she attributes this environmental toxin of hyper-rousing glowing screens as a possible cause for the 40-fold increase in pediatric bipolar disorder from 1994 to 2003, and the 800% increase in ADHD between 1980 and 2007. I mean, these are some very scary statistics. In my clinical work with over 1,000 teens over the past 15 years, I found that the old axiom of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure to be especially true when it comes to tech addiction. Once a kid has crossed the line into true tech addiction, treatment can be very difficult. Indeed, I have found it easier to treat heroin and crystal meth addicts than the lost in the matrix video gamers or Facebook-dependent social media addicts. Or how about the kids that are forced to be on it for homework, and every 5 minutes they are toggling over to YouTube to watch cat videos or play Minecraft? And according to a 2013 policy statement by the Academy of Pediatrics, 8 to 10-year-olds who spend 8 hours a day with various digital media, while teenagers spend 11 hours in front of computer screens, and 1 in 3 kids are using a tablet or a smartphone before they can talk. Meanwhile, the Handbook of Internet Addiction by Dr. Kimberly Young states that 18% of college-age Internet users in the U.S. suffer from tech addiction. And once a person crosses that line into full-blown addiction, whether it be drug addiction, digital addiction, or otherwise, they need to detox before any type of therapy can have any chance of being effective. With tech, that means a full digital detox. That is no computers, no smartphones, no tablets. And the extreme digital detox even eliminates television. The prescribed amount of time is 4 to 6 weeks, but that amount of time is usually required for a hyper-aroused nervous system to reset itself. But that is no easy task in our current tech-filled society where screens are ubiquitous. A person can live without drugs or alcohol, but with tech addiction, digital temptations are everywhere. Now, what is this going to leave us? This is going to leave us with a child that has real problems in trying to not only monitor but control themselves. And to keep them away from the machine, they are going to want to accept their neural dust implants. We read about those as well. Wireless neurodust can monitor your brain. And for anyone who has a neurological disorder in the future, this very well may become a solution. Sand-sized sensor implants can give instant feedback from your neural cells. Science fiction that features wires connecting brains to computers may now be obsolete. Wireless-powered implants, each smaller than a grain of sand, implanted right behind your ear, could serve as neural dust that one day could scan and stimulate brain cells. Such research could one day help lead to next-generation brain-computer interfaces for controlling prosthetics, exoskeletons, and robots, as well as electroceuticals to treat disorders of the brain and the body. The new prototypes made by scientists at the University of California, Berkeley, each are roughly 3 millimeters long and 1 millimeter high and 4/5 of a millimeter thick, and each neural dust mote possesses a piezoelectrical crystal that can convert mechanical power from ultrasonic pulses broadcast outside of the body into electrical power. The energy from 60 ultrasonic pulses broadcast each second drives sensors and other electronics on the mote. And they could probably broadcast those from your smart devices as well. We found out they already do ultrasonic tweets. The piezoelectric crystal reflects some of the incoming ultrasonic pulses, and electronics in the neural dust mote can then alter the pulses to get scattered outwards so they can wirelessly transmit the data they gather. In experiments with rats, the researchers found that the neural dust motes implanted in nerves and muscle fibers could record and transmit electrical data. I was really skeptical of this concept at first since it was so out of the box, says Doug Weber, a bioengineer and neuroscientist at DARPA, who helped fund the neural dust research, but it is a really elegant approach and it works pretty well. The researchers want to create wireless implants to avoid irritating the body, and conventional electronic implants that connect to nerves rely heavily on wires that can inflame tissue over time. This approach they're taking is ingenious, says neuroengineer Jacob Robinson at Rice University. They have addressed one of the most important challenges where it comes to neural interfaces. The scientists had previously explored using radio waves to power and communicate with neural dust motes. However, radio waves are not good at reaching deep within the body, while decades of ultrasonic imaging has revealed that ultrasonic pulses are very good at penetrating soft tissues. This breakthrough technology that really changes what is possible in terms of sensing and stimulating nerve activity, even those deep inside the body. Researchers want to shrink neural dust motes down to just 50 microns, or roughly half the average width of human hair. And at that size, the body should be able to tolerate them much longer. And what really bothers me about this is if we do a flashback to Kurzweil in his discussion yesterday, talking about how we are going to have implants that will connect us and how we're going to have to compete against the machine. And we have all these brain scans and 3D models of our brains coming out. And we have all this damage being done to our brains from our electronic devices. This is not going to be a good future for our kids, guys. Not at all. Experiments so far with neural dust motes have only involved the peripheral nervous system, which serves limbs and organs, and not the central nervous system consisting of the brain and spinal cord. Still, electroceutical companies may have many applications in the peripheral nervous system, such as bladder control or appetite suppression, says Jose Carmina, a neuroscientist and electrical engineer at the University of California, Berkeley. In the long run, scientists want neural dust motes in the brain and the spinal cord. Ding! And one challenge that neural dust targets the central nervous system faces is how ultrasound does not pass well through bone. This raises challenges if they want to create a brain-computer interface, and I'm not saying it's impossible by any means. Researchers are now working on miniaturizing their motes further, discovering more biocompatible materials to package them in so that they can last longer inside of the body and then incorporate other sensors into them. Eventually, motes could be used anywhere in the body, not just the central nervous system. In the long term, we want to be able to send energy to and communicate with implants all over the body to record data from a variety of organs in many different ways, and even report on the conditions of tumors or cancer therapies. These findings were published in the journal Neuron. So there you have it, guys. They are going to utilize neural dust implanted in the brain to be able to monitor us and maybe fix us in the future. November 1st, 2017, Scientific American. Do we need brain implants to keep up with the robots? Well, maybe if our frontal cortex is damaged. Neuroscientist Christoph Koch calls for a crash program in brain technologies to make us smarter. Pundits have been fretting a lot lately about robots leaving humans behind, taking our jobs, and possibly a lot more, as in the Matrix and the Terminator films. Christoph Koch may my go-to source for brain science for 25 years, has a proposed solution. To keep up with the machines, we should boost our cognitive power with brain implants, he says. Well, of course he does. Cook, who directs the Allen Institute for Brain Science, which has an annual budget of more than $100 million, floats his idea in a Wall Street Journal essay, quote, "To keep up with AI, we need high-tech brains. The subheading, technologies that enhance the human brain, will be essential to avoid a dystopian future fueled by the rise of artificial intelligence." Cook looks at the non-invasive methods such as transcranial magnetic stimulation, but he doesn't think that those will be sufficient. Ultimately, to boost our brain power, we need to directly listen to and control individual neurons, he says, the atom of perception, action, and memory and consciousness. And for that, we need to directly access brain tissue, requiring, for now, at least some surgery to penetrate the skull. Cook notes that brain implants are already helping paralyzed people to control computers and robots, and they are being investigated for treatments of depression and other mental disorders. Ding, ding, ding. Future implants could help us download huge amounts of information instantly, he claims, so we can learn new skills without even trying, like Neo learning to fly a helicopter in the Matrix. Another exciting prospect, says Cook, is melding two or more brains together into a single conscious mind by a direct neuron-to-neuron link, or this was like connecting our neocortex to the cloud, like Kurzweil talks about. Like the Borg in Star Trek, Cook urges a crash program to design safe, inexpensive, reliable, and long-lasting devices and procedures for manipulating brain processes inside of their protective shell, and that would be your skull. And remember, the 21st Century Cures Act has a huge amount of money and research, not only going into the Brain Initiative, but also it's studying and curing the addiction epidemic, which is all part of that frontal cortex and the dopamine button. So a few responses pop into my unenhanced mind. First, brain implant pioneers like Jose Delgado and Robert Heath, who were infamous for experimenting on a bull and a gay man, respectively, and whose work I just described on the site, would have loved Cook's proposal. They would say, yeah, bring it on. We want more moolah for our research. You'd be living in a neuro-utopia by now. Second, Cook neglects obvious questions raised by his science fiction vision. It is scary enough that bad guys can hack into our smartphones and our laptops, but what if they could hack into our brains? Implants would give Big Brother the ultimate form of mind control and mind reading, ding ding, and it would also make artificial intelligence omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. And third, and this is my most important point, and that is the author, not me, we are nowhere close to being able to enhance the human brain in this manner that Cook envisions. Scientists have been experimenting with neural technologies for mental illness for more than half a century, and they have little to show for it except a lot of brain scans that they are turning the AI onto now. So reliably integrating neural tissue and neural technologies would require cracking the neural code, which Georgie Porgy Church is helping do with the Brain Institute and the Allen Institute of Brain Science, memories, emotions, decisions, and such. And it was Cook himself who made me doubt that science will solve any neural code anytime soon, if ever. As I pointed out in a column last year, neuroscientists have, if anything, too many candidates for neural code. There are population codes, rate codes, temporal codes, grandmother cell codes, chaotic codes, and others. And Cook once told me that the neural code is most certainly not as simple and as universal as genetic code. Neural code may seem to vary from different species and even in different sensory modes within the same species, but the code for hearing is not the same as the code for smelling, and that's where the machine is going to help us. And in part because the phonemes that make up a word change within a tiny fraction of a second, while smells wax and wane much more slowly. There may be no universal principle governing neural information processing, says Cook, and above and beyond the insights that brains are amazingly adaptive and can extract every bit of information possible, as well as inventing new codes as necessary. So little is known about how the brain processes information that it is difficult to rule out any coding scheme at this time. Cook is genuinely worried about humanity's future. That was clear when I interviewed him last year in Seattle for a book I was writing on the mind-body problem. He expressed his concern over inequality, political instability, nuclear terrorism, and war, and he feared that science, far from solving our problems, might exacerbate them. Advances in artificial intelligence, for example, could displace human workers, and vast numbers of trucks and cabs will be automated because it's safer, quicker, cheaper. Cook told me that, well, what we are going to do with these 303.5 million drivers, are we going to turn them into Java programmers? Well, I doubt it. And if we don't look after them, they may get angry, and then we may have a lot of social discord. Yeah, but listen to this. Here's a story that came out May 30th, 2017, out of Inverse.com. There is a 5% chance that AI may lead us to an extinction-level disaster. It is now time to start paying attention. Experts are generally optimistic about the potential of AI, but also aware of major risks, according to a big new survey. Precisely 352 experts were asked to predict the future in a paper from researchers at Yale, Oxford, and the Future of Life Institute. And while estimates vary greatly, the median results point to a 50% likelihood of high-level machine intelligence, where unaided machines will accomplish every single task better and more cheaply than human workers by the year 2061. And what effect does that have on humanity? Researchers said on an average there was a 20% chance that it could be good, 25% chance it would be on a balance of good, 20% that it might be neutral, 10% chance that it would be bad, and here's the scary part, a 5% chance that it would be extremely bad, i.e. human extinction. And as we have these machines damaging our higher level executive functioning in our children, how is that going to affect our ability to compete against the machine without a neural implants? Because I don't think if we can't accomplish a simple task going from point A to point B, we don't have the ability to recognize whether or not we have a compulsion with technology or whether or not we're being sucked into the machine. We are only going to want to be sucked into the machine more and eventually merge with it. Facing this risk, 48% of the respondents said that society should devote more research to minimizing the risks of AI, but whatever happens, it will likely happen fast. 65% of the respondents said progress was happening faster in the second half of their careers than it had in the first. And while the respondents did not explain how AI could go horribly wrong, we should look to Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking to explain, because they may replace humans. And here's last but not least, this is out of Quantum Magazine, how building a robot that wants to change the world, computer scientist Christoph Selge is trying to circumvent the needed rules that guide robots' behavior. His strategy, give robots a goal of making humans